Hey there everyone, this is Dan. Welcome to my very first ever top 10 list. I've been wanting to do this for a long time. Been working on this for quite a while, trying to make this happen. Finally I'm able to do so. So it would be only fitting that my very first top 10 list be an original Nintendo top 10 list. You know me in video games. Anybody who knows me in real life knows I'm a big video game person, have been since I can remember, and grew up heavily with the original Nintendo. Anybody watching, I know everybody who's watching this video has played Nintendo at least once or twice, even if they never played any other video game system, any other video game, whether they played Mario Brothers or Duck Hunt or Zelda, something on the original Nintendo, and have fond memories of it. Very influential system, huge in pop culture nowadays, so figured it'd be only fitting that my very first top 10 be an original Nintendo top 10 NES game. With this list, just a couple quick things keep in mind. One, of course, with any top 10 list, I just got to throw this out there. It's all opinion based, but I'm always up for discussing. I want to know what you guys agree with, what you disagree with, what your top 10 list may be. If you make a video, put the link down below in the comments as well. I'll definitely check it out. I'm all about hearing what you guys thought. Maybe there's something I missed when creating this list, or something I didn't realize. As I have played most of the games in the NES library, but I'm always up for new opinions, new thoughts. It's how we kind of get a better understanding, especially if there's a game I've never even played that ends up being an amazing game. The other thing is certain games like Mario Brothers, Legend of Zelda. Now, they are absolutely amazing video games. No doubt about that, and you'll see them pretty much dominate the top 3 in almost any top 10 Nintendo list. You won't with this one. They're amazing games, as I mentioned, and I owned most of them when I was younger, or still do, and have great memories of them. No doubt they're awesome, but my top 10 will involve, of course, nostalgia factor will be a big influence in the list, but also I made sure the games were also very good, maybe not as high quality as Mario or Zelda, but they were extremely innovative. Different gameplay styles unique to the time, or hybrid styles, or a combination of different gameplay elements, along with other features that were ahead of their time and used to this day, now that those new styles have been really polished and refined. Also, one game per series. It will be a permanent rule with any of these top 10, so that we don't have a whole list dominated unless it's a theme list for that series, like if I do a Final Fantasy list. But without further ado, here is my top 10 original Nintendo games of all time. Now, Rygar came out early in the Nintendo life cycle. I remember my brother borrowing it from a friend of his when I was little and playing it, fell in love with it immediately. It was extremely ahead of its time. You took the role of some sort of Greek-inspired warrior battling against mythical creatures, which is all well and good, but as I mentioned, it was extremely innovative. You got to go anywhere you wanted to go, which was almost unheard of at the time. Backtrack, you want to go through this door, you want to go to that area, doesn't matter. Some areas were limited at first, but part of the shtick to this game was you could, as you traveled and explored, you'd find new items, you battle bosses that would unlock different items as well, which would open up more and more of the map to allow you to go even further until you beat the game. On top of that, as you battled enemies, you could get items that would, kind of like experience points, increase your life meter as you got a certain amount of them each time. So nothing was really like it at the time. You had Mario Brothers and Donkey Kong single screen or just A to B formats. On top of that, the graphics on Rygar were top tier for its time, and even through most of the Nintendo life cycle. Full backgrounds, very detailed. You got a sense of where you were in the game, as opposed to most games where it's just a black background, or very, very minor amount of detail. Music and sound effects were very solid. Music was extremely catchy for Nintendo chiptunes as well. So it had its moments and its issues, since it was an early title and it was way ahead of its time, so it didn't have that polish you saw with some of the other video games during the NES cycle, but it definitely led the way in innovation, and it's some of the best memories I have. Right now, I wish I could see the look on all of your faces. You're probably wondering, Eliminator Boat Duel? What is this hot mess? Well, to put it simply, it is pure fun. Straight, awesome fun. Game I accidentally discovered, a friend of mine had it and I borrowed it one day back in middle school, and I fell in love with it. It was one of the most fun Nintendo games I played. It's as you can see, a boat racing game, but what makes it such an enjoyable experience is the style in the racing. There's 3 different styles. You have a drag race section that you start the race off with. Then you have a behind the boat view. It's kind of fast, going between the flags, and then you have an over the top view, kind of similar to the old Micro Machines video games, and even Super Sprint or Super Off-Road. So, and it'll switch it in the race to different sections, and the later races have much longer tracks, which has you switching back and forth between these perspectives constantly. Also, as you continue through the game, depending on how you place, you gain money. Money to repair your boat, because you can take damage, but also increase things like engine, armor, your turbo boost, your acceleration, etc. So with a little bit of strategy in there as well, kind of gives you more incentive than to just win the race. You want to keep upgrading that boat. But it combines several different viewpoints. The graphics are solid on the game. Nothing revolutionary, but they're good. Few technical glitches. The music is fantastic. Sound effects are good. So a solid game by itself. A lot of innovation, and most importantly, it was just straight fun. Many of you probably wondering why right now I put Castlevania II Simon's Quest on this list at all, let alone not put Castlevania 3 on the list. Well, I thought about it, and besides, of course, my fond memories of the game, more importantly, I put it on there because of the leaps and bounds in the innovation that 3 did not have. 3 only took the original Castlevania and polished that formula, added a few new features to give it some variety, and just polish it to a shine. Where number 2 was completely innovative and ahead of its time. The free-range exploration again, as well as the variety of the items that you can acquire. How you acquire the items were real unique. It wasn't just a matter of beat a boss and you get one. You had to kind of figure a lot of things out to continue to move forward. Now the game, arguably so, has many flaws. There's no doubt about that. But the formula that was used in Castlevania II Simon's Quest was also used and polished again to a shine in Symphony of the Night and all the Castlevanias that followed beyond that. All of them used that until the latest couple of iterations when they completely rebooted the series. But as I mentioned, the innovation was there, the fun factor was there, and nobody's going to argue that the graphics weren't very good for its time, and of course the music and sound effects were never ever in question on being of poor quality. So definitely an extremely fun game as far as I'm concerned. Definitely lacked a lot of polish, but it was a formula that in and of itself is rock solid and used by some of the most successful games to this day. So the next game that I picked was Light Force. It's the spiritual successor to Gradius by Konami. It is a combination side-scrolling and top-down perspective shooter. You play in a spaceship, flying to various alien locale, taking on tons of enemies, firing weapons and bullets and missiles in every direction, and massive bosses, very strange bosses, at the end of each level. Now, reason it's in my list is one, it's a solid game by itself. The controls are extremely tight, which you have to have in a game of that style. Otherwise, it's gonna just be unplayable. Graphics are fantastic. The variety of locales are great too. You don't feel like there's any cookie cutter action going on with the stage design. Sound effects and music are some of the best in the Nintendo library, in my opinion, and it probably has, if it's not my favorite, it's in the top 3 boss theme for any Nintendo game. But the fact that it also does side-scrolling, it does top-down, just the innovation in the level design, the styles between each level, like I said, it doesn't feel cookie cutter. And it's just such a well-rounded, polished game. I remember playing it tons and tons as a kid. And if you're into this kind of game, or if you've never even played it and just want to try something new, I highly recommend it. The next game we have is Strider by Capcom. The game came out a few years into Nintendo's life cycle. The game is another exploring type of game, a little different than the other ones so far, but you can kind of see a general theme going on here. Basically, you are a specialized ninja, part of an elite group called Striders, and you airdrop into cities. You have to solve the mystery of your teammate disappearing, and then it turns into a much bigger plot within, a little bit of plot twist within there as well. You get to choose which cities you go to. You'll go back to certain cities a couple of times as you get new items and abilities, unlock more stuff. It's really awesome with the fact that you get experience points as you beat levels that unlock new abilities. And you have a pretty decent list of abilities by the end that you can choose from to power yourself up, heal yourself, and so on. The game graphics were pretty solid. There were a lot of graphical glitches within the game, within a lot of slowdown, that kind of stuff. So that kind of prevented it from moving further up on this list, since the glitches can be pretty significant from time to time. But the graphics themselves were solid. There's a few bosses in there, a lot of unique enemies that require different strategies to beat. The music is great, stands out, and good sound effects. And it led to a number of other video games down the road as well. There was a popular arcade game that was ported to the Genesis. They've had some sequels since then. Striders appeared in a number of other games like Marvel vs. Capcom. So it's got a big cult following. It was a reasonably successful game back when it came out, and so it's easy to find, fairly inexpensive. The controls are a little weird sometimes, but you do get used to it. But like I said, it's still a pretty solid game when it comes to the controls. Graphics and sound are fantastic, minus some glitching with the graphics, and a great story, decent amount of gameplay. So very solid game to begin with. Definitely worth checking out and seeing why it was extremely innovative and why I feel it definitely should be on this list. So next up on the list is Goonies 2 by Konami, which came out fairly early on in the Nintendo's life cycle. The game itself is an explorer adventure game, similar to a couple of the other games that have been on this list so far. You kind of see a theme here for my top 10. But again, it was very innovative in the fact that you explored all different directions, backtracked, open up new areas depending on what you found. But what was unique about this one was there was actually a second side to the map. Now, part of the shtick with this game was you enter a hallway through these doors. You could go through the hallway in a first-person perspective style, finding sometimes items, keys, different individuals that could kind of help you out with a hint or for your life or whatever. And then there was also doors you go through, and if you went to the other side of the hallway and there was a door to allow you to go through, you'd end up on a whole second map that you would have to explore, and they were pretty healthy sized maps. So you had to kind of think almost three-dimensionally with this game. So very, very unique. Even today, to today's standards, a 2D game with a 3D map. So very rare that we see that. And of course, all the basics were very well done as well. Graphics were fantastic, especially for its time. Music, top-notch. Even had the 8-bit chiptune rendition of the Cyndi Lauper song from the Goonies in the main opening area, the cabin levels. And controls a little floaty, but they were still very solid. My only real complaint with the game was the fact that there was no bosses in it. So that's what kept it from being even higher on the list than it is, I think, in my opinion, because you kind of want to build up to that. But other than that, again, a solid game. You can find it very inexpensively online. Definitely check it out if you never have, and especially if you're a fan of the Goonies. Next up on the list is Bionic Commando by Capcom. Came out kind of close to midlife of the Nintendo system. Very solid game that was not as obscure as some of the other ones that I've mentioned so far, but it was not on the veins of Mario Brothers or Legend of Zelda. But it is an amazing game in its own right. Had a ton of unique innovations within it, which is why, in my opinion, it's on this list and should be on more top 10 lists. The levels were fairly A to B style, but some of them were vertical, some of them horizontal. They also had different areas within the levels. You enter in the buildings or caves and whatnot from outside and kind of explore that way. You'll get different items as you go through the different levels that you can choose how your character is equipped when he enters in the level, which weapon, which items, and so on, so you can start matching your play style. Again, very ahead of its time. Normally everything was just handed to you and you're told you're going in with this stuff and that's that. And the main innovation being there was no jump. Your character could not jump. You press the jump button on a platformer, and instead, depending on which direction you're facing and which direction you're holding, you'll launch out a mechanical arm, which would grapple onto ceilings and other things, and you could swing and kind of launch yourself almost Spider-Man-like to different platforms or climb up that way. So the vertical stages really had a unique twist to them. Plenty of levels, tons of great bosses. Music is some of the best. They did a remake soundtrack for Bionic Commando Rearmed. Highly recommend it if you're into that kind of stuff. Adds a bit more of a modern techno flair to it. It's really good. But the whole game was beyond solid. It's fairly inexpensive to find and buy. And I recommend it immensely if you've never played it before. It's definitely one of the best. Now we get to the top three, get to the heart of the matter, and coming in at number 3 is Bucky O'Hare. If you remember that old school obscure cartoon that came on for about 1 or 2 seasons, Saturday morning cartoons, that's what this game is based on. It is a platformer from Konami. The first 4 stages you can actually choose where you go and which order you want to play them in. At the end of each of those levels, you unlock one of the other members of the crew, which you can switch to on the fly. Every character had their own unique weapon and abilities. So once you go through those 4 stages, then everything else is pretty straightforward, linear platformer. But It was fantastic graphics. It had probably in my top 3 favorite soundtracks for the old school Nintendo games, the chiptunes, and the controls were fantastic as well. Super tight controls. Everything about it was polished. It was a very solid game, very solid platformer, one of the best Nintendo games out there, and probably one of the, if not the best licensed game in my opinion, since most of the licensed games tended to be complete garbage. But the problem with it is nowadays is because it is such a good game and it was really obscure back then, copies of this game, physical copies, can be hundreds of dollars. So it can be a little tough to find, but if you ever get a chance to play this game, definitely pick it up, definitely give it a try. It's a very straightforward game, but super tight controls, great graphics, great soundtrack, a little bit of variety of the levels. The levels themselves are extremely varied, but the fact you can choose which of the first 4 you do in what order, and then switching the characters on the fly, it is a solid game, which is why I made it to the top 3 of my list. Now we come to number 2, Xesis. I do believe that's how it's pronounced. To this day, I still have no idea how to pronounce this game. Xexyz. But despite its goofy name, it is, in my opinion, probably the most underrated game on this list, and if not all of Nintendo's library. It is a long game. It's a platformer with some maze-like parts at the second half of each of the platforming levels. Then you fight a boss on a flying platform where you actually have to move through the whole screen, almost like a shooter style, but you're controlling your character and his weapons, and then you actually go into shooter style levels similar to Life Force. So it changes the genre altogether, and there's even a mid part in each of the castles that has a shooter style as well with a maze. As you go through the levels, you unlock new types of weapons. You can buy and re-equip whatever ones you like. Amazing soundtrack, actually has a decent story for a Nintendo game. Controls are top tier. This is an amazing game that slipped under everyone's radar. I got it as a kid, as I saw commercials for it, and it hooked me, and I grabbed it, and it was probably the best game that I got out of complete randomness. Not knowing anything about it, never played it, never rented it from the video store, just picked it up, and I cannot tell you how many times I went through that game. It is one of the best I've ever played for the Nintendo, and you owe it to yourself to try this game out if you haven't, especially since chances are you've never even heard of it. Definitely pick it up. Hidden gem. And here we are, number 1, Blaster Master. Maybe a little foreshadowing in the opening credits, but it is number 1 in my heart. It is a absolutely solid game, a little underrated, but there's been a huge following for this game since it first came out. The game itself, super unique. You start off with a tank called Sophia the Third. Tank can jump, shoot multiple directions, travel in the water. You start off in an open grassy area. Beautiful graphics and backgrounds, very detailed. You get a good sense of where you're at in the world. Dynamic. Then once you get to, you'll see these little doors. You can actually jump out of the tank and travel around that same area on foot, which was, again, very unique. You're either in the vehicle the whole game or you're a lone man through the whole game. But this game you could switch it, but then it took it a step farther. You can enter into these doorways that are scattered throughout this huge explorable world, and the whole game perspective changes to a top-down look. You control your character, which has now a much more close-up detailed look to him, and explore that way. Get power-ups for your weapons, go fight massive bosses which are varied, very unique, good challenge to them. They can get a little tough, but they are fantastically designed. The fact that the game is such a hybrid and done so well that it gained that huge following right out of the gate. It was a huge game world for the Nintendo, even by the end of Nintendo's life cycle. Few games ever matched or surpassed Blaster Master's explorable world. And you explore by, like I said, on foot and with the tank. As you beat these bosses, you get new abilities for the tank, to climb walls, to hover, to dive through the water. So the variety of levels could really get unique and not cookie cutter like at all. Same with the enemies. There was a lot of different enemies that required different strategies as you played. You couldn't just run and gun your way through it. You had to actually have some pinpoint platforming and dodging and maneuvering with the enemies. And you need good controls to do that, which this game very much had very rock solid controls. Now, they did some sequels to the game over the last couple of decades that were fairly hit and miss, but they just did a remake of this game for the Nintendo Switch and the Nintendo 3DS. It's about $10, and it is absolutely wonderfully made. It's a little easy in my opinion, but where the original Blaster Master had much more of challenge going on. Due to the kind of the limitations with the controller, you only have the 2 buttons, so you couldn't do a few of the unique maneuvers that the remake has. But anyway, it is a fairly easy to find game, not too expensive. Especially now with Google, since there is no map or locator devices within this game. Google, you may need that for the first run of the game to help you get through it, unless you don't mind getting lost. You can do it the old school way, get a notepad and draw a map or write down where you have explored, so that way if you run out of lives and continues, you can get a little farther each time until you beat the game. But you owe it to yourself. If no other game on this list, gotta try this one. You can pick it up on the Virtual Console. You can pick it up on whether it be Wii or Wii U. You can pick up the remake. Physical cartridge, again, very easy to find and inexpensive. But it is, in my opinion, the best game on the Nintendo, since it really went forward with a ton of new innovations that were ahead of its time, even back then. A lot of gameplay mechanics that we enjoy nowadays is thanks to this game and games like it back in its time, and some of the best music, graphics, controls, top tier all around. So definitely pick it up, definitely try it. Well, there you have it, my top 10 NES games of all time. Now, as I mentioned at the very beginning of the video, I'm sure this list did not go in the direction you were expecting if you are fairly familiar with Nintendo Entertainment System and their library of games. I'm sure a lot of you are wondering why there's no Metroid, Zelda, Mario Brothers, Mega Man. And honestly, for me, as I mentioned before, they were all of those series and games are fantastic, but they all did the basics well, or they innovated, but they didn't do it well enough as far as I was concerned. Mega Man probably the closest. Mega Man 2 or 3 easily could have made it on this list, and I would almost say they're an honorable mention. But Metroid did not age well, as far as I'm concerned. Zelda didn't really get good until Link to the Past, and then Mario was just basic platforming polished to a shine. That's it. No true innovation, just a really good polish. So these games are very unique, ahead of their time, which for many of them is why they've received the cult following today, where they may not have been as known about back in the past. But I'm going to be doing more lists in the future. Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, PlayStation, etc. I'll do more lists that are specific to series, Mega Man, Zelda, Mario, Castlevania, etc. And we got a lot more coming down the road. Any suggestions you guys, any lists you guys want to see when it comes to the old school video games, definitely hit me up in the comments below and let me know so I can kind of keep that idea bucket full. And I thank you very much for taking time to watch this. I hope you enjoyed, and I will catch you on the next one.